SIGHT is a multi-theoretic and integrative research initiative for psychological studies of intersubjectivity, in therapy and elsewhere. And to describe what intersubjectivity is from a psychological point of view, that is almost as difficult as it is to make science out of it. But as a contrast, it is very easy to experience. Actually, the possibility for sharing intentions and for participatory sense-making, that is fundamental for us. We are hyper-social human beings.
So what I did for this piece was I was thinking a lot about actual play and actual games of children, and also of the want to reach someone, and just how can you destroy the normal conversation and let something more basic take over? How can we change the dynamics so that these things that we learned way before we started talking comes to a more prominent position? And I felt like taking away the language, but not only taking it away, but forcing you to be really active about speaking, and sort of using this reflex of putting things into words that we have grown into. It's like a reflex. If I want you to understand me, I will try to say something. And by using that reflex, but destroying the language, I was thinking to be able to overbridge this gap between the feeling that what I say doesn't really correspond with what I want to convey or with what I feel.
At the intersection between psychology, performance art, and cultural theory, an art research project evolved called On the Same Page.
My contribution to the On the Same Page project is to take up the non-verbal elements that are aspects of human communication and place them in broader communicative contexts. The spatial is perhaps the most obvious of these broader contexts. I look forward to experimenting with how performance can intersect with shared spatial codes to result in evidence of intersubjectivity in relation to communication and ultimately identity and meaning.
The performance includes the artist and one participant. The artist sits opposite the participant and begins to talk, but without using known words like a pretend speech. From a psychological perspective, this puts the participants in a beautiful position of play and relational insecurity.
For me, it is really important to reach a level of intimacy, a sense of connectedness when performing a piece. It is for me almost synonymous with quality in the piece. And it was very interesting On the Same Page, because I think that we were able to work with smaller shifts than I have ever done before.
Picture two overlapping circles. One circle represents your subjectivity, that is your domain. The other circle represents the other person's domain. And the overlapping area is where intersubjectivity takes place, where the we is co-created by both you and the other, sharing intentions in implicit mutuality. And that area is the dyadic domain.
I see the opportunity to theorize the expansion of language in the On the Same Page project. Embodied communication and the semiotics of the three-dimensional are just two areas that are outside the realms of verbal communication, but that are at the same time define and support the space we share when we communicate with each other with spoken and written language.
In intersubjectivity, we have the possibility to get really close. And examples of non-verbal closeness and micro-communications of intentions are many. For example, in dancing together when it really works. And in the immediate development of children's play, creating new alternative realities, and that is for fun, but it's very serious. And when playing music together, maybe improvising. in walking together in silence. All these examples show that the children's non-verbal regulation and communication is also of vast importance in grown-ups' everyday life. In business meetings, at a party, in your romantic relations, and in the relation with your boss.
I worked pretty much the way I usually work. I go for a feeling of undefinedness, a feeling of losing the ground where I stand, where everything is negotiable all of a sudden. When I feel that as a performer, I feel like I'm moving towards somewhere where it is like I can play there, and the play is the thing that I'm actually interested in. Because if you really play, all the signals that you're sending out, they will be ways into the piece for the people watching it.
Being psychologically close to another person is not only about empathic listening, because being close requires that two persons, or subjects if you may, expose themselves, getting up close and being somehow authentic. And this is not primarily about what they say, but rather what intentions they have, because what we express or what we perceive and share, that is intentional states, shared by all forms of relational communicative behavior, including, for example, the movement of gaze, the dynamics of the tonality of your voice, and change of body posture. You see, there is a difference between the explicit life and the implicit experience. You might even say that the non-explicit relational experiences, they are the foundation of our psychological life.
It was very interesting on the same page, because I think that we were able to work with smaller shifts than I have ever done before, because it was only now down to changes in the way we were speaking and sitting, and most importantly, we were just as much performers, both of us. I set up the rules for the piece, but as soon as the participants sat down and began to partake, we were really doing the same thing. I could fail just as much as the participant.
A novel way to study nonverbal connectedness is to measure emotional co-regulation. Emotional arousal is a part of our autonomous nervous system, meaning that we cannot control it directly. We measure emotional arousal curves on both persons, and we're looking at the quality of the coupling between these two persons' arousal levels, if they co-regulate with each other. We also look at if this coupling quality is connected to the participants' experiences of psychological contact, of intimacy and closeness. Intersubjectivity is a concept closely related to the development of our implicit relational knowing. That is what you know about who you can be, what you can do, and how close you can be to another person. And that is a part of your implicit relational knowing. And this knowing did not come to you, explicitly. You know, feeling like a good person is not primarily based on you hearing you are a good person. It's rather based on relational experiences. And the same applies to your knowing of how you interrupt your friends, or how you end a conversation without saying the conversation is now ended. And in relations, we co-create assumptions about ourselves, about the relation and others, and about the world around us.
In the SIGHT initiative, it is extremely interesting to be able to work with researchers from different kinds of fields, from psychology and from social studies, because I find that some of the areas that I have been investigating making art. So I have been investigating them on a really like a physical level. I've been investigating the actions. I find that there are already lots of words and thoughts written about these things, and there are people interested in the same thing, but from completely different areas. The conversations are very exciting.
Symbolic modes that are bound up with the spatial, for example, clothing, body modification such as tattooing, and gender play, are examples that are common for negotiating the social today. These realms of communication can be seen as exemplified in the gesture. Sign language is perhaps the most developed mode of gestural communication, but we all use gesture to communicate. Gestures are shared as nodes in the cultural fabric of reality. In fact, I would argue that gestures are a primary mode for expression and experimentation within the components of social identity today.
In clinical psychology, it has been shown that it is not the specific method used in therapy that makes the big difference, but it is the relation. It is about a change process, and it is implicit. And implicit relational has to do with intersubjectivity. This process is of course valid in all talking curative work, and in the workplace, and in private relations. Unfortunately, it is terribly difficult to research on change processes, especially if they are implicit and if they happen between two persons. Most of our research methods in psychology are developed for studies on one person neuropsychology, one person personality questionnaires, and one person interviews. But we in the SIGHT initiative are determined to investigate what happens in between persons, to develop research methods and to investigate the significance and the consequences of intersubjectivity, both in therapy and elsewhere.